My child, listen with a quiet heart for just a little longer, because some moments arrive so gently that they almost pass unnoticed, yet they carry the power to reshape an entire journey. Today was not ordinary, even if it appeared that way from the outside. Across a place you have never seen, surrounded by conversations that seem to have nothing to do with you, your name was spoken for the very first time within the hearing of someone whose path has been moving silently toward yours. It was not a dramatic announcement. It was not planned. It was simply one unexpected moment, and somehow everything inside them paused. Don't skip, because what happened next was far more meaningful than anyone standing there could have understood. There are moments when a single name feels strangely familiar, as if the heart remembers something the mind has not yet discovered. That is exactly what unfolded. They tried to continue with their day, but the sound of your name lingered in their thoughts like the final note of a beautiful song refusing to fade. They smiled without fully understanding why. They looked away, then looked back again, searching for an explanation that logic could not provide. Have you ever wondered why certain people remain in your thoughts after only the smallest connection? Sometimes the answer does not arrive immediately. Sometimes it grows quietly, one heartbeat at a time. That is why this moment matters more than it first appears. Stay till the end, because something important is waiting for you. While you have been questioning whether your story is moving at all, unseen pieces have continued finding their places. Every disappointment you believed delayed your future has also been preparing someone else to recognize what truly matters. Your soulmate did not suddenly become interested because of grand circumstances. Instead, they became curious because something peaceful awakened inside them the instant your name reached their ears. They could not explain it, so they carried that quiet curiosity with them throughout the day. Every conversation reminded them of that unexpected feeling. Every silent pause invited them to think again. They were not searching for certainty. They were simply following a gentle sense that something beautiful deserved another thought. And while they reflected, you continued living your own day without realizing that somewhere, someone had just begun asking questions that would slowly bring your paths closer together. This is how meaningful beginnings often arrive, not with loud signs, but with quiet recognition. As the evening settled, they found themselves repeating your name softly, almost as if testing whether that feeling would disappear. Instead, it became stronger. Not overwhelming, simply undeniable in its calmness. They wondered why one simple moment had stayed with them longer than anything else that happened that day. They almost dismissed it, almost returned to ordinary life. But then one small detail appeared, and everything inside them shifted once again. That single detail is still hidden for now, because the next moment reveals why hearing your name was only the beginning of something neither of you expected. There is something remarkable about the moments people almost ignore, because those are often the moments that quietly redirect an entire story. The feeling they carried after hearing your name refused to disappear. It was not loud enough to interrupt their day, yet it was present in every silence between their thoughts. They tried to focus on ordinary responsibilities, but every now and then your name returned, bringing with it the same gentle curiosity that had first caught their attention. Don't skip, because this is where the meaning begins to deepen. Without expecting anything unusual, they noticed another small connection. It was not planned, and it certainly was not dramatic. It was simply one more detail that seemed to point in the same direction. Your name appeared again in an entirely different conversation, spoken by someone who had no idea how much those few words would matter. This time, instead of letting the moment pass, they became completely still. They did not interrupt anyone. They simply listened more carefully than before. It felt as though life was quietly inviting them to pay attention instead of rushing ahead. Have you ever experienced a moment when something keeps appearing so naturally that you begin wondering if it deserves a second look? That was exactly what they felt. They were not searching for answers anymore. They were searching for understanding. Somewhere deep inside, a peaceful realization began taking shape. They thought, why does this name keep finding me today? They had no explanation, yet they no longer wanted one immediately. Some answers become more beautiful when they unfold slowly. As the hours continued, they found themselves imagining the person behind your name. Not with unrealistic expectations, but with genuine curiosity. They wondered what kind of smile you carried. They wondered what made you laugh without holding back. They wondered whether your heart had also been waiting through quiet seasons without even realizing why. Those thoughts surprised them, because they were unlike anything they had experienced in a long time. Something important is waiting for you, because this quiet curiosity was becoming something much deeper than a passing thought. Then an unexpected conversation changed the atmosphere completely. Someone nearby spoke about kindness, loyalty, and the rare comfort of meeting a person who simply feels genuine. As those words filled the room, your name crossed their mind once again without anyone mentioning it. They could not explain why those qualities suddenly reminded them of someone they had never even met. Yet the feeling remained peaceful, hopeful, and impossible to ignore. For the first time that day, they made a quiet decision. They would not forget your name. They would remember it. They would carry it with them just a little longer to see whether this unusual feeling would fade, or whether it would continue growing into something meaningful. They walked away believing the day was finally over, unaware that before the next sunrise, one unexpected discovery would make your name impossible for them to ignore ever again. A quiet shift had already begun, even though no one around them could see it. Some changes never announce themselves with noise. They arrive gently, settling into the heart until everything starts looking a little different. That night, as the world slowed down and the usual distractions faded away, your name returned once more, not because anyone spoke it, but because their own thoughts refused to let it go. Stay till the end, because the next few moments reveal why this was never just another ordinary day. They sat in silence for a while, replaying every small detail they could remember. They asked themselves why such a simple moment had stayed with them longer than conversations that should have mattered more. The answer did not come immediately. Instead, another realization quietly took its place. Sometimes the heart notices meaning long before the mind is ready to understand it. They were beginning to experience exactly that. Then something unexpected happened. While scrolling through familiar memories, reading old messages, or reflecting on ordinary moments, they came across a thought that changed the direction of their evening. It wasn't about finding certainty. It was about recognizing a feeling they had not welcomed for a very long time: hope. Gentle, unhurried hope. The kind that asks for nothing except a willingness to remain open. Don't skip, because this next realization became impossible for them to ignore. They whispered your name once again, this time with a quiet smile they didn't even realize had appeared. It felt strangely comforting, almost as though they were becoming familiar with someone they had yet to meet properly. There was no pressure. No rush. Just a peaceful sense that life had placed something meaningful in front of them for a reason they had not discovered yet. As the night grew quieter, they noticed something about themselves. Their heart was no longer asking, "Why did I hear that name?" Instead, it had begun asking, "What if this name is connected to a chapter one haven't reached yet?" That single question stayed with them longer than anything else. It did not demand an answer. It simply invited them to remain curious. Meanwhile, without realizing it, you were continuing your own journey. Every ordinary step you took was moving in quiet harmony with theirs. Neither of you could see the full picture, yet small pieces were finding their place one after another. The timing did not feel rushed because meaningful stories rarely are. They unfold one gentle moment at a time, allowing every lesson, every pause, and every unexpected encounter to carry its own purpose. Before they finally closed their eyes that night, they made one promise to themselves. If your name appeared again, they would no longer treat it as coincidence. They would follow that quiet feeling with an open heart and see where it gently led. They believed sleep would bring the day to an end, but they had no idea that the very next morning would place one unexpected person in front of them, and a single sentence from that conversation would make everything they felt about your name suddenly begin to make sense. Morning arrived without fanfare, yet it carried a quiet sense that something unseen had already begun to move. They stepped into the rhythm of another ordinary day expecting nothing unusual, believing the thoughts from the night before would slowly fade into the background. Instead, those thoughts had become calmer, clearer, almost as if they were waiting for the right moment to reveal their purpose. Don't skip, because what seemed like an ordinary conversation was about to leave a lasting mark on their heart. As they went about their day, someone nearby mentioned a story about meeting a person who had changed another life simply by being genuine. It was a simple story, spoken without drama, but every word encouraged them to reflect on what truly matters. They listened more closely than anyone realized. Something inside them had become more attentive, more willing to notice the small things that most people overlook. Then, without warning, your name entered the conversation once again. No one around them noticed the change in their expression, but inside, everything became still. It was the third time your name had found its way into their day, and this time they did not brush it aside. They quietly repeated it in their mind, letting it settle there. It no longer felt like a random word. It felt familiar, warm, almost like the beginning of a story they had not yet lived. Stay till the end, because this was the moment they made a decision they never expected to make. Instead of allowing curiosity to remain only a passing feeling, they chose to learn more. Not with urgency, and not with unrealistic expectations, but with quiet sincerity. They wondered who you were, what dreams you carried, what lessons had shaped your heart, and whether your kindness was as real as the peaceful feeling they experienced every time your name appeared. For the first time in a long while, they found themselves looking forward instead of looking back. As the hours passed, they noticed another change within themselves. The worries that had occupied their mind only yesterday seemed a little quieter. Hope had not erased every question, but it had gently replaced hesitation with possibility. They smiled more easily. They spoke more kindly. Even those around them sensed a calmness they could not explain. And then something even more meaningful happened. Late in the day, someone shared one small detail about you, not something extraordinary, just a simple truth about your character. They heard that you were the kind of person who values honesty, listens with patience, and never pretends to be someone else. Those few words stayed with them long after the conversation ended. They realized they were no longer curious because they had heard your name. They were curious because they had begun to admire the person connected to it. Yet the most surprising moment had still not arrived. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, they found themselves standing in complete silence, holding one quiet question in their heart: could our paths actually cross one day? They did not know that, at almost the very same moment, an unexpected opportunity was already beginning to form, one that neither of you had planned, and one that would bring your stories closer than ever before. Not every turning point announces itself the moment it arrives. Sometimes it waits quietly, allowing two separate journeys to move a little closer before anyone realizes they are no longer walking alone. As evening settled once again, they carried your name with a different feeling than before. It was no longer simple curiosity. It had become a quiet expectation that something meaningful was still unfolding. Stay till the end, because the next step was not created by chance, but by a series of small moments finally beginning to connect. While making ordinary plans for the days ahead, an unexpected opportunity appeared. It was nothing dramatic, just a simple invitation, a conversation about an upcoming gathering, or the mention of a place they had almost decided not to visit. At first, they nearly ignored it. They thought about saying no. They considered choosing the familiar path instead. But something gentle inside encouraged them to pause for one more moment. That quiet pause changed everything. For reasons they could not explain, they accepted the invitation. The decision felt surprisingly peaceful, as though their heart had already chosen before their mind had caught up. They walked away without realizing that this single choice had quietly brought your two stories one step closer together. Don't skip, because another realization was waiting just around the corner. Later that night, they reflected on everything that had happened since hearing your name for the first time. They smiled at how impossible it seemed that one simple moment had grown into so many meaningful thoughts. They no longer questioned whether your name mattered. Instead, they wondered why it had arrived at exactly the right time in their life. The answer was still hidden, but they had stopped resisting the mystery. Some journeys become more beautiful when every answer arrives exactly when it is needed. At that very same time, your own path continued to unfold in ways you could not yet see. Every ordinary conversation, every unexpected delay, every quiet moment of patience was gently positioning you for an encounter that neither of you could force nor predict. The distance between your stories was becoming smaller, not because either of you hurried, but because both hearts were growing in the right direction. Then, just before the day came to an end, they heard one sentence that settled deeply within them. Sometimes the people who change your life first arrive as nothing more than a name. Those words stayed with them long after the conversation ended. They repeated them quietly, and your name came to mind once again. This time, it felt different. It felt less like a question, and more like a possibility worth protecting. As they looked toward tomorrow, they had no idea that the opportunity they had accepted would soon place them in the exact place where one unexpected detail so small that most people would overlook it would make them believe they were finally moving toward the person whose name had quietly transformed their heart from the very first moment they heard it. Sometimes the smallest decision becomes the doorway to a moment you could never have planned. They woke the next morning with an unusual sense of peace, not because every question had been answered, but because they had stopped trying to force the answers. There was a quiet confidence growing inside them, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. It reminded them that meaningful connections are rarely rushed, they unfold one gentle step at a time. Don't skip, because today carried a detail that would stay with them far longer than they expected. As they prepared for the day ahead, your name crossed their mind before anything else did. It surprised them. There was no obvious reason for it. Yet instead of pushing the thought away, they welcomed it with a smile. It felt natural now, almost as though your name had become a familiar melody they were beginning to recognize. Hours later, they arrived at the place they had almost decided not to visit. People moved around them, conversations blended together, and everything seemed perfectly ordinary. For a moment, they wondered if they had imagined the significance of the past few days. Perhaps nothing unusual was going to happen after all. Then something quietly beautiful unfolded. Someone nearby began speaking about a person they deeply respected. They described someone who remained kind even when no one was watching. Someone who encouraged others without expecting recognition. Someone who carried quiet strength instead of seeking attention. As they listened, they noticed something that made their heart pause. The person being described was you. Not your appearance. Not dramatic stories. Just the qualities that truly define a person. Every sentence they heard painted a picture of someone genuine, thoughtful, and sincere. Without realizing it, they found themselves smiling again. Stay till the end, because this was the moment admiration quietly replaced curiosity. For the first time, they stopped wondering whether hearing your name had meaning. Instead, they became grateful that they had heard it at all. They realized that some people enter your thoughts long before they enter your life. Sometimes the heart begins preparing long before two paths finally meet. As they walked home, everything around them felt strangely brighter. The same streets looked different. The same sky seemed calmer. Nothing in the world had changed, yet something inside them certainly had. Hope was no longer just an idea. It had become part of the way they looked toward tomorrow. That evening, they opened a notebook and wrote down a single sentence they never expected to write. If our paths are meant to cross, I hope I recognize the moment. They closed the notebook, believing those words would remain a private thought. But they didn't know that, at nearly the same time, someone else was about to mention your name in a way that would reveal one remarkable connection, one so unexpected that it would leave them quietly wondering if this unfolding story had been moving toward this moment all along. There are moments that arrive so quietly you almost miss the sound of your own future drawing closer. The day continued like any other, yet beneath every ordinary conversation, another piece of the story was gently finding its place. They had stopped chasing explanations. Instead, they had begun noticing the quiet patterns that kept appearing, each one inviting them to remain open for just a little longer. Don't skip, because the next moment was unlike anything they had expected. As they settled into another conversation, someone casually mentioned your name again. This time, however, it was followed by something they had never heard before. It wasn't praise meant to impress anyone. It wasn't an extraordinary story. It was a simple memory shared with a genuine smile. They heard how you had encouraged someone during a difficult season without asking for recognition. They heard how your words had stayed with that person long after the conversation ended. They heard how your kindness had quietly made someone's ordinary day feel brighter. Those simple details reached their heart more deeply than they expected. They sat there in silence, not because they were searching for the perfect response, but because they realized something important. Every story they had heard about you carried the same quiet thread. Different people. Different moments. Yet the same sincerity appeared again and again. That consistency touched them more than any dramatic tale ever could. Stay till the end, because this realization gently changed the way they looked at their own future. For the first time, they imagined what it would be like to simply talk with you. No grand expectations. No perfectly planned moment. Just an honest conversation where two people could be completely themselves. The thought felt peaceful. It brought a smile they couldn't explain. Then an unexpected question entered their mind. What if hearing their name wasn't the beginning? What if it was the reminder that the right connections often arrive quietly? That question remained with them throughout the rest of the day. They no longer felt impatient. They understood that meaningful relationships are built one sincere moment at a time, and somehow that understanding filled them with hope instead of uncertainty. As evening approached, they received a message about the gathering they had agreed to attend. One small update had been added to the plans. It seemed like an ordinary change, something most people would barely notice. But that tiny adjustment would place them in a different seat, at a different time, beside someone carrying a story connected to yours. They smiled without realizing why. Meanwhile, your own day continued as naturally as ever, completely unaware that quiet conversations, thoughtful memories, and unexpected choices were steadily bringing two separate journeys closer together. The gathering was now only a short time away. They believed they were simply attending another ordinary event. They could not yet see that the very first face they would notice upon arriving would lead them to hear one final detail about you, a detail so genuine, so quietly beautiful, that it would remove every remaining doubt from their heart and leave them ready for the moment your paths were finally meant to cross. The closer a meaningful moment comes, the quieter everything around it often becomes. There was no rush in their heart anymore. The questions that had once filled every empty space had slowly transformed into quiet anticipation. They no longer needed immediate answers. They simply trusted that every small step had been leading somewhere worthwhile. Something important is waiting for you, because this next chapter begins where expectations end. The day of the gathering finally arrived. They stood outside for a brief moment before walking in, taking a slow breath as if something inside was asking them to notice this day more carefully than any other. They could not explain why. Nothing looked extraordinary. People greeted one another with warm smiles, conversations flowed naturally, and the room carried the comfortable sound of ordinary life. Yet their attention kept drifting. Not toward the crowd. but toward the feeling that they were exactly where they needed to be. As they found their place, they noticed someone sitting nearby who seemed unexpectedly familiar. They had never met before, yet the conversation began effortlessly, as though it had simply been waiting for the right moment to begin. They spoke about everyday things at first: dreams, family, small moments that make life meaningful. Then, without planning it, your name entered the conversation once again. Don't skip, because this was the first time they heard your name from someone who truly knew you. The person's face brightened instantly. They spoke about your thoughtful nature, your ability to make people feel heard, and the quiet kindness you showed without expecting anything in return. They laughed while remembering one small act of generosity that had stayed with them for years. It wasn't a dramatic story. It was the kind of memory people only carry when someone has genuinely touched their life. With every sentence, their heart grew calmer. It wasn't excitement alone. It was recognition. They realized that every person who had spoken about you had described the same person, even without trying. The kindness was real. The sincerity was real. The quiet strength was real. In that moment, they whispered softly to themselves, "I've been hearing about the same heart all along." Stay till the end, because what happened immediately after this conversation was something they never expected. Before the gathering came to a close, the person beside them smiled and said something almost casually. "You know, I think the two of you would get along really well someday." The words were simple. No one else in the room gave them a second thought. But those few words echoed deeply within them. For the first time since hearing your name, they allowed themselves to imagine that this unfolding story might one day become real. As they left the gathering, they looked back one final time without knowing why. Then they noticed one small detail they had completely overlooked when they first arrived. A detail connected to you. A detail that would quietly open the door to the most unexpected moment of this entire journey, the moment when hearing your name would no longer be enough, because the opportunity to finally discover the person behind it was now closer than ever before.